I hadn't been back to the ranch in nearly 5 years, and yet, the first breath of dust and sage air felt like it had been waiting for me. Everything was the same, the wide Montana sky, the distant mountains painted in pale blues, the low hum of cicadas, but I wasn't. Dylan was out front when I pulled up, leaning against the fence in that easy way of his, one boot hooked on the lower rail, hat tipped back so the late afternoon sun lit his hair in gold. I'd seen that stance 1,000 times before, when we were younger and the only thing between us was the shared history of summers spent chasing calves and getting in trouble with his older brothers. But now, seeing him there made my chest tighten in a way it didn't used to. "Look what the wind blew in," he called, grinning. Same voice, warm, teasing, but there was a flicker in his eyes when they met mine, like he was taking measure of something unspoken. I told myself I was just here for a break from the city, to clear my head after a string of sleepless weeks and a job that left me drained. I told myself that seeing Dylan was just part of the scenery like the barn or the horses. But the truth was I'd been thinking about him more than I cared to admit, small flashes of his laugh, the way he'd always nudge my shoulder instead of saying goodbye, the memory of him once handing me his jacket without a word when the night turned cold. The truck door thunked shut behind me and Dylan came around to clap me on the back. It should have felt casual. It didn't. There was a moment, just half a second, where his hand lingered, a little too firm, a little too warm. "Got your old room ready?" he said. "Figured you'd be here for more than a night." That was the plan. A week, maybe more. Long enough to remember what quiet felt like. Long enough to... I didn't know. We walked toward the house together, boots crunching on the gravel. I tried to focus on the smell of the hay, the fading light over the ridge, the creak of the screen door ahead. But I could feel it already, that something between us had shifted. And if I wasn't careful, this trip might not be the quiet escape I thought it would be. Dylan and I had known each other since we were kids, the kind of friendship that survived long gaps without talking because the history between us acted like a bridge you could always cross. We'd met the summer I was 13, when my parents sent me to stay with my aunt on the neighboring property. I'd been a city kid then, awkward with a shovel, hopeless with a horse, and Dylan, already at ease in the saddle, had taken it upon himself to civilize me. "Remember the time you almost got trampled because you thought you could just walk behind a horse?" he asked that first night over dinner, smirking at me from across the table. I groaned. "One time. And I survived. Only, 'cause I yanked you out of the way." He leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "You still owe me for that." His parents had always treated me like one of their own, and our days back then were a patchwork of sunburns, creek water, and dusty jeans. Dylan taught me how to drive a stick shift on a rutted back road, how to tell if a storm was coming just by the smell in the air. I taught him how to fake a signature so we could skip chores and take the dirt bikes out instead. But time had a way of erasing the rough edges of memory. We didn't talk about the last summer I'd spent here, how we'd sat on the porch one night, both quiet, watching lightning in the distance, and I'd felt something in the silence I didn't have a name for then. The next morning after I arrived, Dylan met me at the barn before breakfast. "Fence on the south pasture's busted," he said. "Figured you could help me fix it." It was the kind of work we used to do without thinking. Hauling posts, stretching wire, but now every shared glance seemed to hum with something I couldn't ignore. Once, while passing me a length of wire, our hands brushed. Just for a moment. My brain knew it was nothing. My pulse disagreed. "City life treating you that bad?" he teased, catching me leaning on the fence post instead of hammering. I shot him a look. "Just pacing myself. You ever heard of OSHA?" He laughed, deep and genuine, and it did something to me, like I'd been thirsty for that sound without realizing it. By mid-afternoon, clouds were rolling in. Dylan glanced at the sky. "We should head back before it." Thunder cracked, loud and sudden, cutting him off. A warm drop of rain hit my cheek, then another until the whole sky opened up. We made a break for it, sprinting toward the house. The rain hit hard, soaking us in seconds, the smell of wet dirt and alfalfa filling the air. Dylan reached the porch first and turned back, holding the door open. I stumbled up the steps, heart racing, not from the run but from the way he grabbed my forearm to steady me. "Guess you're getting the full ranch welcome," he said, grinning, water dripping from his hat brim. We towed off our boots just inside, the storm drumming against the tin roof above us. My shirt clung uncomfortably to my skin. Dylan looked at me for a second longer than necessary, eyes flicking over my face before he turned away. "Your room's probably freezing now," he said over his shoulder. "Might have to dig out an extra blanket." It was a small thing, but the idea of him thinking about me being cold, of him making sure I'd be warm, lodged itself somewhere in my chest. And as the thunder rolled outside, I couldn't help but wonder what else might get stirred up before this week was over. The storm didn't let up. By nightfall, the rain had turned to sleet, rattling against the windows. The old ranch house groaned with the wind, and the chill seeped through the walls no matter how high Dylan stoked the fire. We'd both retreated to our rooms after dinner, but mine felt like an icebox. I layered 2 sweatshirts and burrowed under the quilt, but the cold kept me awake, my breath fogging faintly in the air. A soft knock came at the door. "You awake?" Dylan's voice, low and muffled through the wood. I hesitated. "Yeah." The door creaked open. He stood there holding an armful of blankets, his hair still damp from earlier, curling slightly at the ends. "Figured you could use these. That back room gets the worst of the wind." "Thanks," I said, sitting up to take them. My fingers brushed his, warm against my own chilled skin, and I almost forgot to let go. He lingered in the doorway, shifting the weight of his bare feet on the old pine floorboards. "Truth is, the wood stove in my room's the only thing keeping this side of the house bearable. You're welcome to crash there if you want." My brain knew this was a practical offer, the kind of thing any decent friend would suggest. My heart heard something else entirely. "I'll be fine," I started, but a sudden gust rattled the window hard enough to make me flinch. Dylan smirked like he'd already won the argument. 2 minutes later, I was following him down the narrow hallway, blanket bundle in my arms. His room was smaller than I remembered, the glow from the wood stove casting the walls an amber light. The air was warmer here, carrying the faint scent of cedar and whatever soap he used. "There," he said, motioning toward the bed. "We can stack the blankets and—" "Both of us?" I asked before I could stop myself. He shrugged, casual. "Unless you want the floor. But I'm not letting you freeze out here." We made a clumsy attempt at arranging the blankets so we each had our own side. I told myself I'd stay on my half. But lying there, the heat from the stove mixing with the quiet sound of his breathing, that line between our sides felt imaginary. At one point he shifted closer, tugging the shared quilt up around us. His shoulder brushed mine, just a light touch, but it felt like someone had struck a match under my skin. "You're shivering," he murmured. "It's fine," I said, though my voice came out softer than intended. He reached over, tugged the corner of my blanket tighter around me. His hand lingered for a moment, fingertips grazing my arm. "Better?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Lying there in the dim light, my mind spun in dangerous circles. I'd been careful all these years not to cross that invisible line, afraid of losing what we had. But now, with him this close, the warmth of his body bleeding through the blankets, every reason I'd held onto felt flimsy. I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, feel the subtle weight of the mattress shifting with each movement. At one point, his knee brushed mine under the covers. Not deliberate maybe, but he didn't move it away. "You know," he said quietly, almost like he was talking to himself, "I forgot how easy it is having you around. Like we just fall back into place." My throat tightened. I wanted to ask if that meant he'd thought about me when I wasn't here. If he'd missed me the way I'd missed him. But the words stuck, caught in the tangle of fear and want. Instead I said, "Yeah, I know what you mean." We stayed like that for a long time, the storm raging outside while something quieter, and far more dangerous, built between us. I wasn't sure if I wanted the night to end, or if I was terrified of what might happen if it didn't. The wind died down sometime past midnight, but I didn't sleep. Not really. I drifted between light dreams and the steady awareness of Dylan's presence beside me. His breathing, the occasional shift of his weight, the faint creak of the mattress. Every small movement seemed to pull me toward him, even though I kept my eyes shut and my body still. When I did finally open my eyes, the room was dark except for the embers in the stove, casting faint red light over his face. He was lying on his back, one arm tucked behind his head, staring up at the ceiling. "You awake?" I whispered. He turned his head toward me, and even in the low light I caught the glint of his eyes. "Yeah." There was a pause, just long enough for my pulse to start doing that uneven thing it always did around him. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He gave a small shrug. "Too much in my head." I hesitated, my fingers curling into the blanket. "Like what?" Instead of answering right away, he exhaled, slow and deliberate, the sound almost lost under the quiet ticking of the stove. "You ever feel like you've been carrying something around so long, it's just easier not to set it down?" I swallowed. "All the time." His gaze dropped to the space between us. "What if you set it down and it changes everything?" Something in my chest pulled tight. "Depends on what you're setting down." For a while, the only sound was the wind shifting faintly outside, the faint pop of wood in the stove. Then Dylan rolled onto his side, facing me fully. The closeness made my breath catch. his knee brushing mine under the covers, the heat radiating between us. "I don't know when it started," he said, voice low. "Maybe that last summer you were here. But every time I thought about saying something, I told myself I'd ruin it. Ruin us." I felt the words before I fully processed them, like a rush of warmth and fear all at once. "Saying what?" I asked, though my voice was barely audible. He stopped, his jaw tightening. "That I think about you. Not just when you're here. All the time. That I've missed you in a way that doesn't feel like just missing a friend." The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. My heart thudded so loud I was sure he could hear it. "You don't have to," I started. "I do." His voice was firm now, though his eyes still held that careful uncertainty. "Because you're here and I can't just pretend I don't feel it anymore." I searched his face, looking for any sign this was a joke, or some moment he'd take back. But all I saw was truth, plain and unguarded. "I was scared too," I said finally. My voice felt strange, like it belonged to someone braver than me. "Scared if I said anything I'd lose what we have. Scared you'd look at me different. So I just didn't." Dylan's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Guess we've both been idiots then." A nervous laugh escaped me, breaking the tension for half a second. But then we were quiet again, and in that quiet something shifted. He reached up, slow enough that I could have moved away if I wanted, but I didn't. His hand brushed my jaw, warm and tentative, his thumb catching lightly on my cheekbone. "You're freezing," he murmured. I leaned into the touch without thinking, my eyes closing for the briefest moment. Not anymore. When I opened them again, he was closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that I could feel his breath, see the faint rise and fall of his chest. We hovered there, like crossing that last inch would be irreversible, and maybe it would. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. "I won't," I answered. That was all it took. His lips met mine in a slow, searching kiss. No rush, no force, just the careful press of years' worth of unspoken words. I felt his hand slide to the back of my neck, anchoring me, while my own fingers found their way to the rough cotton of his shirt. When we broke apart, neither of us moved away. Our foreheads rested together, breaths mingling in the warm space between us. "This changes everything," he said, but there was no fear in it now. "Good," I whispered. He laughed softly, and the sound wrapped around me like the quilt. We didn't talk for a while after that, just lay there, the kind of silence that feels full instead of empty. But somewhere between the warmth of the stove and the steady beat of his heart under my palm, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. For a long while we stayed like that, close enough to feel each other breathe, the wood stove crackling softly beside us. The storm outside had quieted, but inside my chest, everything felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. Dylan's thumb traced a slow line along my jaw before he leaned back just enough to look at me. "So," he said, voice low and teasing, "you've been keeping secrets." I smirked, though my heart was still racing. "You're one to talk." Mine was more of a delayed admission. I laughed under my breath. "A decade counts as delayed, yeah." His smile softened, and he shifted onto his back, his arm brushing against mine. I mirrored him, staring up at the wooden beams overhead. "Feels strange," I admitted. "Like I'm seeing you for the first time, but I've known you forever." "Guess that's the best part," he said. "We don't have to start from scratch." That sank in, how all the years, the summers, the countless moments of just being near each other had built something solid enough to hold this new, unsteady thing we were stepping into. "You know," he added after a moment, "if you'd told me back then, I probably would have kissed you right there on the porch." "Yeah." I turned to look at him, raising a brow. "You sure about that, cowboy?" He grinned, eyes glinting in the firelight. "I'm sure." We fell into an easy rhythm, the kind you slip into when all the tension that's been pressing on you finally breaks. Our shoulders bumped now and then, and neither of us pulled away. At one point, Dylan reached over, caught my hand under the blanket and just held it. No big declaration, no performance. Just his warm, calloused fingers laced through mine. "What about after this?" I asked quietly. "I mean, I'm not here forever." His grip tightened slightly. "I've thought about that," he said. "We'll figure it out. You're worth the trouble." Something in me eased at that. "That's not a very romantic speech." He smirked. "Would you prefer I said something like, 'I'll ride through 100 snowstorms just to see you'?" I laughed. "Maybe tone down the drama, but, yeah, something like that." He shifted onto his side again, studying me in that way that made me feel both exposed and understood. "All right then. I want you here. Doesn't matter how. We'll make it work. And if that means I'm driving into the city every couple of weeks or you're out here mending fences, fine. Just Don't disappear again. The words hit deeper than I expected. I'd been so sure that confessing would make everything fragile, something to tiptoe around. But instead it felt like the opposite, like we just reinforced something that had always been there. I leaned in, pressing a softer kiss to his lips this time, lingering just long enough to feel him smile against my mouth. We didn't sleep much after that. We talked about nothing and everything. The old truck he still hadn't fixed, the time I accidentally let the chickens into the barn, the way he still hated the taste of coffee but drank it anyway. And in between the words were touches, the brush of his fingers against my cheek, my hand resting on his chest, the warmth of him beside me. Somewhere near dawn we both drifted off, tangled in blankets and each other. And for the first time in years I woke up without that quiet ache of something missing. The weeks slipped by faster than I wanted. Every day seemed to settle into a rhythm, fixing things around the ranch, sharing meals in the kitchen with the radio humming low, talking late into the night until the wood stove burned down to embers. On my last morning the air was crisp and bright, the kind of cold that made your breath visible. My bag was already in the truck, and I was pretending to double-check I hadn't left anything in my room just to buy myself a few extra minutes. Dylan was waiting by the fence again, same as when I'd arrived. Only now the sight of him standing there didn't hit me with uncertainty, it felt like coming back to something I'd been searching for. "You're stalling?" he said as I walked over. "Maybe." I leaned against the fence beside him, the boards still cool from the night. "It's a long drive. Guess I'll have to give you a reason to come back." I raised a brow. "What kind of reason?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small worn horseshoe keychain. The metal was smooth in some places, nicked in others, years of use visible in its surface. "This was on my first truck," he said, pressing it into my palm. "Figured you could hang it on your keys. That way you've got a piece of the ranch with you." I turned it over in my hand, the cool weight of it settling into my skin. "You're giving me your lucky charm?" "Not lucky anymore," he said with a half smile. "Already found what I wanted." I tried to laugh it off, but the words landed somewhere deep. "You're really leaning into the cowboy thing, huh?" He grinned, but then his expression softened. "I mean it. I want you to come back. Doesn't have to be 5 years from now or even 5 months. Just soon." I closed my fingers around the keychain and nodded. "Soon." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped closer, his hand finding mine, not the casual, quick grab of a friend, but a steady, deliberate hold. His thumb brushed against the inside of my wrist, and I realized that for all the years I'd known him, this was the first time we'd stood here like this. No pretense, no hiding. "You better get going before I talk you into staying," he murmured. "Too late," I said, smiling despite the heaviness in my chest. The kiss was quick this time, just a press of lips, enough to carry all the unspoken things we didn't have time to unpack yet. When we pulled back, I could still feel the warmth of it, lingering like the last note of a song. I climbed into the truck, the keychain resting on the console beside me. As I started the engine, Dylan tapped the roof twice, an old signal from when we were teenagers meaning see you soon. Driving down the long dirt road, the ranch shrinking in my rear view, I realized I wasn't leaving the way I'd arrived. Back then I'd come looking for quiet, for space to think. Now I was leaving with something better, something that made the miles ahead feel lighter. The horseshoe swung gently with each bump in the road, catching the sunlight. And I knew without a doubt that this wasn't an ending at all. It was just the start of a new trail.